Hi, this is Mike Warner from Work Hard Playlist Hard. You're listening to Your Morning Coffee, the podcast with my friends Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart. Weekly music news for the new music business.
From our friend Bill Werde, director of the Bandier Music Business Program at Syracuse University for Music Business Worldwide. In the age of generative AI, it's high time for artists to organize.
And from Joel Gouveia, the death of the record deal.
From Kristen Robinson and Rachel Scharf for Billboard, how AI rights are changing record contracts and why music attorneys are pushing back.
And a guest column by Russ Krupnick for Billboard, The Other Vinyl Revolution, why the used record market shouldn't be overlooked. Well, we've got so much to talk about. Jay and I are really happy you're here. We're going to start the show right about now.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 Standing by. Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Well, good to see you, Jay. It is a lovely day, and here we are chatting about the music business.
Yeah, best part of my week, my friend.
Yes, it is. Well, by the way, we've got a wonderful Your Morning Coffee podcast special episode that has dropped. It's a conversation with RIAA Chairman and CEO Mitch Glazier. It is live. Check it out.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. You know, in his 25 years at the RIAA, he's played a vital role in music industry's transition to streaming and anywhere, anytime access to music.
Yep, Mitch has worked on every major copyright bill considered in the past 3 decades. You and he discussed the state of the music business in the U.S. with a focus on the policies, issues, and opportunities with AI. Excellent, excellent conversation. What a cool dude.
Yeah, that was a great conversation. There was a piece in Music Business Worldwide this week from Mandy DeLugdug, and the headline was Spotify to show AI tags in song credits, where artists have chosen to disclose through their label or distributor. So Spotify they just started testing this feature that shows whether artificial intelligence was used in making a song, but the tags only appear when an artist chooses to add them.
Yeah, the AI credits feature, currently in beta, was quietly disclosed within Spotify's updated support page. It shows AI contributions within the song credits section of Spotify's mobile app. The move comes in response to growing pressure over AI-generated content on streaming platforms.
Yeah, listeners can see whether AI played a role in certain elements of a track like lyrics, vocals, instrumentals, production, etc. Spotify noted that AI credits show how AI contributed to the song, not that the entire track is AI generated.
The rollout, which according to Billboard began with DistroKid users, allows labels and distributors to submit AI use credits that appear in song credits on mobile.
Yeah, so, we're going to have to rely on someone's honesty for that. Another piece in Music Business Worldwide, this is from Murray Stassen. The headline was 75,000 AI-generated tracks now flood Deezer daily, representing 44% of all new music uploaded to the platform. So these new figures revealed by Deezer last week make a sharp escalation of the 60,000 tracks per day the company reported in January. So that's up 15,000 tracks really fast. And that was when synthetic content represented a little less than 40% of daily deliveries.
It also marks a significant jump from the 50,000 AI tracks Deezer was receiving per day in November, 30,000 in September, and just 10,000 when it launched its patent-pending AI detection tool back in January of 2025.
Yeah, we've been talking about their detection tool quite a bit here. So alongside the new data, Deezer's announced a fresh operational measure. The platform has now stopped storing high-res versions of AI-generated tracks on top of its existing policy of removing that content from algorithmic recommendations and editorial playlists.
Consumption of AI-generated music on Deezer remains low at between 1% to 3% of total streams, according to the company, with the vast majority, that's 85% of those streams, detected as fraudulent and demonetized.
Yeah, they've been an industry leader in this space. So Deezer commissioned an international study, and we talked about this. It found that 97% of listeners can't tell the difference between AI-generated and human-made music today, and that 80% of people agree that fully AI-generated music should be clearly labeled.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting. Really interesting. Well, Jay, before we get going, let's thank the sponsors, man. We would so appreciate having them on our team.
Yep.
Support for the show comes from Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. Founded by Bruce Houghton, Hypebot is edited by touring artist and publisher Jeremy Young and supported by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town.
Yeah, we love Bands in Town. Now over 100 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It's the #1 artist services platform connecting over 700,000 artists with their superfans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates to music fans across all platforms. And Apple Music is now using Bands in Town for their concert listings.
All right, and the highlight of my week, of course, is always hanging out with my good buddy Jay Gilbert, music business consultant, educator, curator of the weekly Your Morning Coffee newsletter, and a former executive with Universal Music, Sony Music, and Warner Music Groups, and one of the most organized people I know.
Wow, I'll take that. Thank you so much. And I get to do this podcast every week with my good friend Mike Etchart, longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, so cool, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal Music Group. And he told me about a new documentary that I need to track down on Rockfield Studios. Gotta find that one.
Yeah, I gotta watch that. I forgot that it was out there. I saw the trailer, and I gotta go back and check it out. All right, let's jump into the story. This one is from Joel Gavia. It's the death of the record deal. So in the death of the record deal, Joel Gavia argues that the traditional record label has been structurally hollowed out and now functions as little more than an inefficient venture capital fund running on outdated terms. Sparked by a lunch conversation about Canada's biggest musical exports, Drake, The Weeknd, and Alessia Cara, Gavia observes that today's superstars are internet native, often outsiders to the industry establishment, and become household names before they ever play a live show. This pattern reveals that the historic functions of a label are no longer essential to building a major career.
Interesting. Gavia traces how power has migrated from the three legacy majors, Universal, Warner, and Sony, to the distribution layer itself, with Spotify's around $110 billion market cap exceeding the combined value of all three of the majors. That is crazy. The label's response, consolidation, exemplified by Universal's $775 million acquisition of Downtown and Pershing Square's $64 billion bid for Universal, we've been talking about, mirrors the late-stage playbook of dying industries like cable, radio, magazines. Meanwhile, the 5 core services that labels once provided, which are distribution, marketing, radio, A&R, and touring, are now all available a la carte, often from better specialists at a fraction of the cost.
The deeper threat, he argues, is to the master recording itself. The entire industry rests on the assumption that masters are scarce and definitive. But Taylor Swift's re-recordings, compulsory licensing law, and AI-driven production tools are converging to make the master just one version among potentially thousands.
Right. Joel goes on to write that combined with founder unfriendly deal terms, like the 360 deal, perpetual master ownership, 15% royalty splits, etc. Capital is now routing around labels via family offices, alternative funds, and direct fan financing. Gouveia closes by sketching his quote-unquote portfolio of 5 concept, a vertically integrated artist holding company that collapses label, publisher, management, and fan platforms into one structure and predicts the majors will still exist in 10 years, but they won't matter.
Well, it's a fascinating article. So let's talk about some of the key takeaways. The first, the biggest acts no longer need labels to break. So Drake, The Weeknd, and Alessia Cara built household name fame online before ever touring. The Weeknd's first live show came after 200,000 people had already downloaded House of Balloons.
Yeah, the next one was that distribution has eaten the industry. Spotify alone, with around $110 billion market cap, is worth more than Universal, $38 billion, Warner, $16 billion, and Sony Music, $15 to $20 billion, combined. The pipe is now worth more than everything flowing through it.
Right. The next takeaway, consolidation signals decline, not strength. So Universal's, again, $775 million downtown acquisition and Pershing Square's $64 billion Universal bid reflect the same playbook used by late-stage cable, radio, and print, buying competitors when organic growth dies.
Right. The next one, all 5 label functions are now commoditized. Distribution, right? Marketing, radio, A&R, and touring can all be assembled independently.
The next point, modern A&R doesn't develop artists, it signs ones who are already developed themselves. He says the back of the venue with a clipboard model is extinct. Labels now just pour gasoline on existing fires.
Yeah, Joel writes that the master recording is losing its scarcity. Roughly 80% of streaming royalties flow to masters versus 20% to publishing, a ratio that only holds if the master is the definitive version. Taylor Swift's re-recordings proved otherwise, and AI now lets anyone produce studio-quality covers in an afternoon.
Right. His next point, compulsory licensing is the structural weak point. He says master recordings have no right of refusal. Anyone can legally cover and re-record a song. And AI multiplies this into infinite versions, shifting value toward publishing and artist identity.
Right. And he says that catalog buyers may have overpaid. Private equity purchases of Dylan's catalog, Springsteen, Queen, etc., were priced as 100-year annuities, but those valuations assume a model already being replaced.
Right. The next point, labels are stuck running 2005 VC terms. While tech founders keep about 70% of their companies on standardized founder-friendly contracts, musicians sign 360 deals with 15% royalties and surrender masters in perpetuity. A gap capital is actively routing around via family offices, revenue share funds, and crowdfunding.
Yeah, the next takeaway? The future is the post-label company. Gouveia's portfolio of 5 model, 5 great artists under a single holding company, spanning label, publisher, management, and fan platform, with 0 masters surrendered, represents what replaces the legacy structure. The majors will persist, they just won't matter.
Wow. Really interesting article. Many cool things to think about.
Well, he's been sort of a flamethrower, and I mean that with all due love and respect. We've covered a few of his stories lately, and they've gotten a lot of feedback. I'm going to reach out to Joel and see if we can get him on the show. But whether you agree or not, it's certainly food for thought.
Absolutely. Our next article is from Kristen Robinson and Rachel Scharf over at Billboard, How AI Rights Are Changing Record Contracts and Why Music Attorneys Are Pushing Back. So Billboard investigates the ways labels accumulate AI training rights, either through explicit new contract language or novel applications of older provisions.
Yeah, this Billboard investigation by Kristen Robinson and Rachel Scharf reveals that record labels are increasingly embedding AI training rights into artist contracts, either through explicit new clauses or by repurposing longstanding licensing provisions like quote-unquote blanket license language. The trend has accelerated in tandem with major labels striking settlements and licensing deals with generative AI music companies like Udio and Suno.
While the industry publicly champions an opt-in approach that gives artists control over how their work is used, attorneys interviewed by Billboard warn that labels may already have enough contractual leeway, particularly in the US and UK, to license artist catalogs for AI training without requiring individual approval. The result is what one lawyer calls a Wild West deal-making environment where artists and their representatives are scrambling to secure approval rights before AI training becomes a default label privilege.
Right. So here are a few key takeaways from this great piece. The first one, explicit AI training clauses are appearing in new contracts, right? Sony-owned B1 recordings, Believe, and BMG have all included language in recent European deals granting them rights to use recordings for training, validating, and testing generative AI models. BMG contracts go further, prohibiting artists from delivering AI-generated tracks and barring AI-powered re-recordings or voice deepfakes.
Yeah, the next takeaway, the trend tracks with major industry settlements. So UMG and WMG settled their copyright suits against Udio in the fall of 2025 and signed licensing deals. WMG followed with a Suno deal in December. Cobalt and Merlin later struck their own Udio agreements. Sony remains in active litigation. AI training is now a routine and contentious point in record deal negotiations.
Right. The next takeaway, it talks about European versus US and UK legal frameworks and how much they differ. So all explicit AI training language identified by Billboard appeared in German and French contracts because European law typically requires parties to spell out every right being transferred. US and UK contracts allow a broader, non-specific grants, meaning labels may not need new language to claim AI training rights.
Right. The next point, blanket license clauses are the back door. So top artist attorneys recently realized that existing blanket license provisions originally designed for deals with TikTok or Instagram could plausibly be used to opt artists' work into AI training without seeking individual approval. Some labels have reportedly already taken the position that they don't need special approvals to train.
Right. The next takeaway, opt-in rhetoric may not cover training itself. So Warner Music Group CEO Robert Kinsel, UMG's Michael Nash, and Udio's Andrew Sanchez have all touted opt-in principles, but artist advocates note that these announcements typically reference outputs, name, image, likeness, voice, rather than training inputs. Believe was the only company to provide a statement emphasizing its consent control, compensation, and transparency framework with explicit case-by-case opt-in.
Yeah, another takeaway, lawyers are pivoting to approval rights. Since labels likely already hold the underlying grants, attorneys like Colin Morrissey and Audrey Benualid are negotiating approval rights rather than fighting the grant rights itself to give clients veto power over AI training uses. Artists with future technology approval clauses in older deals may already have leverage.
Yeah, and the final takeaway from this piece, cautious optimism that labels will still ask. Despite the legal latitude labels appear to have, attorneys Morrissey and Jason Borarski, both predict labels will seek artist buy-in anyway because AI is a too high-profile a flashpoint and a healthy artist-label relationship depends on it. Super interesting breakdown.
Wow. They're really getting into the nitty-gritty on this stuff. Our next article from Billboard, it's a guest column by Russ Krupnick, The Other Vinyl Revolution, Why the Used Record Market Shouldn't Be Overlooked. So long before Taylor Swift began moving millions of new vinyl records, the seed of a different vinyl revolution was lurking in storage boxes and milk crates, and my garage, by the way, in millions of American basements and garages, the used marketplace.
Right, and if you haven't heard it, we did a guest special episode with Russ Krupnick just a couple weeks ago. It's really insightful, and we talked a little bit about this, but I've always felt like this is one of the areas of the music industry that's underserved. and that's tracking used vinyl. So Russ goes on to write that the vinyl comeback has been the central story of the music business for more than 10 years. Sales of new vinyl records rebounded from a few 100,000 units in 2006 to 48 million last year, totaling $1 billion in U.S. revenue, according to the RIAA. Credit, nostalgia, yearning for an analog experience in a digital world, and more than a few releases from the likes of Taylor Swift, BTS, Harry Styles that target superfans.
Yeah, new vinyl gets most of the attention as dollars for used sales don't flow to the labels, publishers, and artists. However, retailers benefit, and used vinyl also speaks to the needs of the fan. Still, the used market is difficult to measure through traditional means. At Music Watch, tracking the buying habits of used vinyl shoppers has been an essential part of our annual music study in the U.S. for 20 years. Some of the statistics from 2025 study are really quite startling.
Yeah, let's dig in. Since 2016, used vinyl sales have increased by 171%. While that's not as big an increase as for new vinyl sales, which rose 269% over the same 10-year period, that level of growth is nothing to sneeze at. Used vinyl has been outselling CDs in the U.S. for several years now, and Music Watch estimates that 42 million used vinyl records were sold in the U.S. last year, while Luminate reported 34 million CD sales last year. Could used vinyl be a $500 million market?
Well, Russ says it's hard to pinpoint as pricing for used vinyl is difficult to get at. While Discogs report that mint used product averages around $36, there's a lot that isn't mint, and a significant portion is sold at flea markets, auctions, and antique shops for much less. Based on historical price estimates Music Watch provided to the record labels and conversations with vinyl experts, Russ says we assigned a value of about $12 for the average used record. At that price, revenues for the used market in the U.S. alone would translate to $500 million.
Wow, that's incredible. I think it's probably higher than that, but I trust Russ and Music Watch. So last year, 57% of new vinyl buyers also purchased used vinyl. Meanwhile, nearly 90% of used buyers purchased a new record. In other words, the record store day buyer shopping for that Bruno Mars compilation at Newbury Comics during RSD 2026 is quite likely to walk out with a used record as well.
Right. Russ says it's not just boomers. 1/3 of used vinyl buyers are in the Gen Z age group, 27% are millennials, and 30% are Gen Xers. The major difference is that the average Gen X buyer purchases 3 times as many used albums as the average Gen Z buyer. Boomers, meanwhile, are more likely to buy used and not new. And he says, sorry, Taylor.
Rock is by far the most popular genre among used vinyl buyers. This includes classic rock, alternative, metal, and other variants. In fact, interest in rock among used vinyl buyers outranks hip-hop, R&B by nearly 2-to-1. In light of these stats, it's clear that used vinyl shouldn't be ignored as a key driver of the vinyl revolution. Even if you're a stakeholder who doesn't benefit directly from used sales, they help to support retailers, not to mention the fans who sell them.
He says, and as noted here, used vinyl sales don't cannibalize the market for new product. He says, in fact, the data suggests quite the contrary. Exploring new artists or genres via used product might lead to more new physical music sales and even increased streams, ticket, and merch sales. He says, in other words, the used vinyl market is a critical cog in a healthy music ecosystem.
Yeah, this is a fantastic piece by our friend Russ Krupnick. And if you don't know, he's the managing partner at Music Watch, and that's a research and insights firm that specializes in music and entertainment. Great job, Russ. And our final story this week, in the age of generative AI, it's high time for artists to organize. This is a guest column for Music Business Worldwide written by our friend Bill Werde, and he's the director of the Bandier Music Business Program at Syracuse.
Right. He says the story of the music industry and generative AI platforms is moving fast. The majors have empowered multiple partners with the clear intent to license more, avoiding the mistake they made by giving Apple all of the leverage during the download era.
Right. Bill goes on to write that Suno wasn't even launched until the end of 2023 and Udio a few months after that. but each had secured at least one major label license by the end of 2025. Clay, Stability AI, and Sound Labs each joined Suno and Udio as AI companies with at least one major label license.
Right. He says the majors are often taking equity stakes in exchange for licenses, according to multiple sources. This is a strong hedge against being omitted from unanticipated revenue, a la the past mistake of taking pennies from the iTunes store while Apple raked in dollars from iPods.
Yeah, and if the era of AI becomes a meaningful part of the modern music industry, the biggest music companies are moving quickly, incredibly, to position themselves to profit, well, as they should.
He says, but while the majors are applying what they have learned from the evolution of digital music, there is one group that almost willfully is not. He says, artists. Because artists, the lifeblood of the business, have accepted table scraps era after era over the past 25 years.
Yeah, Bill goes on to write that when Spotify launched, the majors negotiated equity stakes. By the time it floated on the New York Stock Exchange in 2018, the majors collectively held more than 10% of Spotify. Warner sold its entire stake in 2018 for about $500 million. It kept roughly 3/4 of that money while allocating about $126 million to artist accounts, meaning that if an artist wasn't recouped, Warner effectively used this money to pay down the artist's debt to Warner Music Group.
Wow. So Sony sold half of its Spotify stake for $768 million back in 2018, and to its credit, paid out around $250 million to artists regardless of their recoupment status. Like Warner, Sony paid artists in line with their contractual royalty rate.
Right. In 2018, Universal confirmed it would share any Spotify equity profits with its artists before reportedly being persuaded by Taylor Swift to forego associated recoupment balances across its roster. So far, UMG hasn't sold any of its Spotify stock. It currently holds a tranche of shares in the streamer worth about $3 billion.
Well, the upshot, when the dust settles, the majors are probably going to keep 2/3 of billions of dollars netted from the sale of Spotify equity that wouldn't exist were it not for the incredible artists these companies leverage. Managers have raced to thank the majors for this privilege. I get it. That's the game we've been playing, he says.
Right. Bill goes on to write that, but why didn't artists, especially top-tier commercial artists, jointly demand their own pool of equity from Spotify pre-launch? Why wasn't it already written into artist contracts that the sale of any equity derived from the value of their work be paid out regardless of recoupment status and perhaps at an even higher rate than standard royalties?
Well, he says, I'd argue the answer is the same for why artists don't have health insurance or pensions or higher catalog royalty rates, or he says, I could keep going because artists can't, won't, or don't organize. There is no powerful popular union for U.S. artists. Sure, he says, there are emerging organizations like SONA and MAC rooted in benefiting artist and writer communities.
Yeah, but he goes on to say that today's biggest artists aren't fighting in a strategic, consistent way to make things better for smaller acts or for future stars. Now that we've entered the AI era, the majors are doing what they should be doing, negotiating strong table stakes. The artists, they're crossing their fingers.
He says, for this column, I spoke to a handful of top artist managers and attorneys, each of whom represent arena-level talent or bigger. They explain that there are some hidden institutional reasons why artists do not unite.
Right. Stars are advised by a team of people, largely paid on a percentage basis, who know that the artist's careers come and go like the wind. This incentivizes advisors to look for short-term cash.
He says, what's more, the attorneys reviewing artist deals often work for firms that make more money representing the very same corporations that artists sign with. He says a law firm might make great bank from an artist for a few years, but what if they've been printing cash from the major labels and promoters for decades? Whatever angle you're viewing from, that's a conflict. No one wants to rock the boat. He says, I'm not even sure a lot of artists fully understand they're on a boat.
So if artists did unionize, what could they possibly ask for? Unshockingly, the artist reps that I spoke to had some ideas, some of which I've included here. These weren't just directed at record labels, Live Nation, AEG, and others were also in the conversation.
Right. Well, number one, healthcare. He says no minimum payments or access to what the American Federation of Musicians offers, but better, comprehensive healthcare benefits. There are complications. Artists are not and shouldn't be employees of labels. He says things can still improve.
Yeah, another thing they'd ask for, a meaningfully increased streaming rate for older artists. There are legendary artists who can no longer tour that are paid 12% on streaming, offered up one top artist rep, calling it a crime. Some call for royalty rates to rise once an act is recouped. Good idea, but with a catch. Some catalog artists don't recoup and remain loss-making for their label.
Yeah, he says other catalog acts, however, don't recoup despite their music having become substantially profitable for their label because of the artist's recoupment tally is only reimbursed via their sliver of a royalty rate, not the entire earnings of their records.
Right. The other thing they'd ask for is a standardized industry non-recoupment forgiveness program. The majors, especially Sony, deserve credit for pioneering the write-off ignoring of legacy acts' unrecouped balances in windfall situations like the Spotify equity thing we just talked about. This has resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars flowing directly into artists' pockets.
He says, however, not all artists signed to labels have a straightforward story to tell. He says one artist rep I spoke with called for an unrecouped balance forgiveness program to be standardized across the industry, wiping out the shortcomings of some of the pretend ones that have been introduced.
Yeah, and the next one they asked for would be reverse morality clauses. What's that? Well, labels can dump artists when they do the wrong thing. Why can't all artists leave their record company or publishing deal if it turns out that the boss or the person who signed them is caught undertaking unethical or illegal wrongdoing?
Wow. Number 5 is transparent night-to-night charges in the live space. One manager claimed there is virtually no transparency on what artists are being charged by promoters. He says, call it the beginnings of an artist bill of rights. Most of these suggestions aren't economically transformational for either the largest companies or the biggest acts.
Yeah. Bill goes on to say that, most artists never become the biggest acts or only briefly hit that level. For them, such ideas could be significant. Would it take much more than a handful of prominent superstars demanding that similar clauses are standard in all agreements?
U.S. artists are legally considered independent contractors, therefore generally cannot unionize under the Federal National Labor Relations Act, the NLRA. But every problem has solutions when the right questions are being asked.
Yeah, and Bill had this really great example. He said that in 2011, NFL players had a reverse issue. They decertified their union in order to legally press an antitrust suit against league owners. The plaintiffs in that suit, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, and Peyton Manning, arguably the 3 biggest stars in the NFL at that time.
He says the suit was key in securing a collective bargaining agreement that gave players vastly improved working conditions, health care, a legacy fund of over $620 million to increase the pensions of retirees, higher salaries, and other benefits. In spite of this, PR-wise, both sides in the dispute were widely seen to have won.
Super interesting. Artists need to get out of the mindset of scraping for pennies and into the mindset of collective leverage. Artists have it more than anyone else if only they learn how to use it. So artists, who is your Brady? Who is your Breeze? Who is your Manning? If current contracts make it difficult to unionize, what is your workaround strategy?
He says one of the barriers to superstar unionization may be the natural self-centeredness of artists themselves. Said one very senior artist rep, imagine waking up every day surrounded by a team of people telling you you're right, you're the best about everything you do and say. By the time an artist actually reaches the top, it can be hard to get them out of La La Land.
But finally, Taylor Swift convinced UMG to cave on the recoupment issue if and when it sells its Spotify stock. Chappell Roan announced she was leaving Wasserman, and days later, the company was for sale. This is merely individual leverage at work. Just imagine the future that could be possible if artists were willing to align for the greater good. Bill Werde, that is one fantastic
Great piece. Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. Something to think about for sure. Well, listen, we got to wrap up the show. We do want to thank our sponsors. Big thanks to Hypebot and Bands in Town. We certainly appreciate everything they do for us every week. By the way, if you would like to advertise in the podcast and the newsletter, you can go over to yourmorning.coffee for more information. Music was by our friends, the Licorice Quartet. And by the way, if you enjoy the show, Jay and I would certainly appreciate it if you'd just tell one friend. That would be great. So on behalf of Jay Gilbert, my good buddy, I'm Mike Etchart. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week on the Your Morning Coffee Podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.